I realize you have your views are quite strong, and you have a position as a spokesperson. So probably I'm not going to convince you by anything I might say, but I wanted to throw a few thoughts your way on two matters. One was you were making the quotes from the Bible that they sound very abominable, or wars and so on. And I just wanted to say from the viewpoint that I have on it, is that, if we look at our world, we see God has created this world. We can see He did not mean it to be just totally peaceful and calm. There's wars, there's heroes, there's great villains, and it's straightforward in the Bible. He actually says, I raised up Pharaoh. I created good and evil.
Try and move forward to your question. I'm sorry, it's just we have such limited time.
Okay. That's how I understand it. Is he tried to create? It's not just a calm or a dull or a boring world. There's a lot going on, and he's created these things to keep it interesting, for lack of a better word. The other thing I was going to say is that many of the stories in the Bible, like the fleeing of the Jews, they have a lot in common with communist ideals. They have a revolutionary aspect to them. Like Mao fleeing is somewhat similar to the Jews. Also, Jesus had a revolutionary feel to him. He says, we're rebels.
I'm sorry to do this again, but do you have a question?
But basically, what I said at the beginning is I'm giving a view on these topics.
Right. Well, we're trying
to consider.
Right.
Okay, so
right.
what's the reaction to that view?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, look, I do think, and if you read the Bible with a critical eye, if you strip yourself of sort of the romance that it gets taught in, and I know I grew up reading the Bible, and there was things that I read that struck me as profoundly wrong. I remember going to a wedding where they read Ephesians 5:22, woman should submit to her husband as a husband to the Lord. There's things you hear and you kind of go, well, that's really wrong, but there must be some meaning, and then I pushed it aside. So I think if you read the Bible, I think we have to be very clear. There's no confusion on this. If you don't push aside the contradictions and you read it as an actual text, it is a document of massacre, plunder, rape, pillage, oppression, and organized and enforced ignorance. That's just objective. Now, given that, no, it's true. It's really true, and it's harmful. And so given that, I know that there are many people, and Paul spoke to this, and I respect your sentiment on Jesus as a revolutionary. There are many people who've been inspired to fight against injustice and to reinterpret and utilize the myths in the Bible. But I have to say, this is happening in spite of the myths of the Bible, and not because of them. And I think we can unite and struggle against oppression, against exploitation, against the wars and all of this. But we do have to have a healthy and vigorous debate over what's real and what's not, and to lead to human emancipation. It's complex. Look, doing brain surgery, you hope somebody studied and really been scientific if you're going under the knife. If you want to radically change human society, that is a very complex thing. You don't want any make-believe operating, especially in those who are leading it. And that's where there's an import to the fight for atheism and a fight for people to be scientific. And the more science we have, it doesn't mean you definitely automatically are moral, but it means that you have the basis to come up with a morality that corresponds to the emancipation of humanity in this world, the real world, the only world there is. So there should be unity, I agree, with people who are religious, but the fight for science and the fight for reality, and especially now where there's the rise of religion in such a huge way, and it's a shackle, and it's growing, and it's mobilizing people to do horrific things all over the world, whether it be people who are under the U.S. bombs in Afghanistan and Iraq, who are being recruited into reactionary Islamic fundamentalism, which is a nightmare, whether it be people in this country, a lot of people who are, in Hurricane Katrina, I went down there, people really thought that was because they were sinful. Or the people who helped vote against Prop 8, gay marriage, who thought they were doing a moral thing. These are harmful things, and sections of the oppressed are being mobilized against other sections of the oppressed and being kept ignorant of the way the world works. And so, I think there's room for unity, but there ought to be a lot more vigorous struggle on these questions, and we do have to deal with reality.
I'd like to make a brief comment following on what Sincera just said. So it struck me as shall I say, strange to suggest that what's in the Old Testament is a reflection of the fact that God wanted to make things more interesting. I could use a little less interest in the world. If that saves a few billion people here and there, I think I'm fine with getting bored. I mean, I can always turn on TV. But the thing I think that it's really missing, where I thought you were going actually was something different, because the typical sort of reaction to what Sansara said originally in her presentation is, well, you have to have the world that we have, because otherwise you wouldn't have free will. Now, there's another philosophy here. We don't want to get into a discussion of free will. But let's assume that we have some kind of an intuitive understanding of what free will is, okay? The fact that is interesting about the Old Testament is that all of the horrible things are commanded by God. They're not just a result of human beings acting on their own free will and, making a mistake here and a mistake there, a genocide here and a genocide there. Now, He is the one that commands us to do these kind of things. And presumably, as I said earlier when I was talking about Eutyphro, it's not a bad idea, even if you don't think it's particularly moral, to do what the God says, because otherwise you're going to be the one to be genocide. So it really seems strange to me for people that want to defend, especially the Old Testament. The New Testament is quite a bit more to debate, I think, about what is good and what is bad about the New Testament. But the Old Testament is really one of those incredibly entertaining novels that are full of gore, sex, and mayhem, and that's why it's so interesting. But if it is a reflection of the morality of a God, my God.